Welcome, everyone. Very glad to see a full house, and very glad to have Tucker Harding starting his postdoctoral year as our digital humanities specialist, trying to get Weatherhead and ELAC, up to speed with the rest of the digital universe that's just expanding out there, evolving and dying at the same time, I think, to some degree. I've worked with Tucker for many years. He was the representative from the Center for New Media Teaching and Learning to the East Asian Languages and Cultures Department. So I know that he's worked with other staff and language instructors and faculty over the years, and got his PhD at Teachers College and is now teaching courses at Teachers College on using digital humanities. And the focus for him, and something that's always been challenging for me, I think, is that he wants to know what our goals are with digital humanities. And I think our reaction, our sort of experience is when we hear about it, or Sharon Marcus encourages us to develop digital humanities, we just kind of think about getting something out there on the web, and we don't think about our learning and teaching goals. And so over the years, we've worked out something, and I think the other challenge has been that Tucker doesn't want to provide a bunch of models that then we imitate. I remember an old IBM ad about the spinning fiery wheel, and it's glittery and it looks good, but so with the students, as I've worked with students over the years, the openness in assignments has been a challenge for some. It's been quite rich in terms of the feedback that you get, because the kind of creative directions, when you don't direct people strictly to what you're expecting by giving them a sort of limited model, you come up with lots of different, you leave those openings to them, and the outcomes are quite good. And then I've resisted Tucker's injunction not give out models, and I've said, here are 3 different models. They go in very different directions. Be inspired by them, but then go, don't feel restricted by them. And I think at that point, the models give them ideas. And so I think Tucker today will give us some examples that will open our minds, but hopefully not restrict us. And then Tenzin Dickyi is here from the Shelley and Donald Rubin Foundation to talk about especially the Treasury of Lives. And she has also long experience here at Columbia as a master's student, and we're very happy to have her back here. We've talked with the Shelley and Donald Rubin Foundation about eventually bringing the Treasury of Lives here. It's continuing to evolve on its own. I think, again, in some ways best that way, because our library that was considered ingesting it had its own restrictions and would have limited its growth at the time. But it's a website and a resource that we use and that our students contribute to, and I think it's a great model for potentially for other fields if they want to sort of see what can be done with digital humanities. It's a great model for what can be done, and it keeps growing in wonderful new directions, including most recently a mapping direction that I think is really exciting. I haven't seen anything like this actually happening at a university. There's a nimbleness to nonprofits that makes them more effective, I think. So hopefully you can show us some of that as well. So I'll open the floor to Tucker.
All right. Thank you, Gray, for the introduction. And thanks to everyone who helped bring this group together. I have to say, kind of the lead up to this, I had no idea how many people would actually come today. This is kind of the inaugural conversation, we might call it, about digital humanities and ELAC and supported by Weatherhead. So I'm happy that there are so many people here, and I'm hoping that we can quickly, when I see an audience sitting in rows like this, it sort of inspires a tendency to present and go through lots of examples and models, as Gray talked about. He said Tucker doesn't like models very much, and then said the word model like 10 times.
Just to make you squirm.
Right. It's not the case that So I'll introduce myself just a little bit more to give you a little bit of context about where I'm coming from with this whole fellowship. So my background is in education technology specifically. So I used to work for many years at the Center for New Media Teaching and Learning, where we had a very interesting mandate. The center was created in 1999, which was a time when the web was first really starting to generate a lot of use cases around educational discourse. People were looking to the internet to answer questions pertaining to the nature of study itself. And it began with kind of the registrar's office making course selection and all of that stuff available online. And then it evolved into what we now have at Columbia, Courseworks, but other course management systems. And those technologies also inspired a whole bunch of questions about the real utility and potentials of some of these tools for helping us think more carefully and purposefully about the potential value that they have for bringing our educational experiences to higher levels, and in some cases, whole new levels. So my perspective comes somewhat from that legacy of technology in the academy specifically. But then I have another angle that I like to approach the question of digital education technologies from, which is one of looking at communication itself, the landscape of communication technology, and the relationship between people and how they connect to and relate with and inspire other people in different ways, either at the level of the individual or between large organizations. And this is very important as part of an education conversation, because some would take education to be somewhat synonymous with communication itself. So if we think about ELAC and the humanities generally and what the sort of sublime undertaking is, it's a study of humanness in a variety of contexts and through a variety of modes of engagement and interaction. Now, we're kind of lucky these days because we're kind of entering into a new era of communication across all of humanity. And it's inspiring a lot of important and interesting questions about how we can best guide the evolution of these tools to help educators and the academy itself begin to further advance its own goals and to accomplish them in new and, in some cases, more efficient ways, but also to inspire more questions that we have about what it is we're all actually doing here. And so any talk about digital humanities really needs to find its way back to the root question of what this institution is and what it's trying to accomplish. And when Gray introduced the idea of my insistence on identifying goals, it kind of comes down to that fundamental question of the nature of places of study and what their purposes are. Why do we create environments of study in specific ways? What inspires our design of those things? What experiences have we had for how different modes of engagement can affect student learning in different and interesting ways? And this question is compounded these days with this new landscape of technology that we live within. We can't separate educational process and discourse from the broader context of the world of communication in which we live. So I think part of the interest here at Weatherhead and ELAC is really recognizing that intersection to be one of great importance. There are legacy approaches and processes that we're all very comfortable with and familiar with in our teaching and in our research. But as these new tools and technologies grow and evolve, sometimes in response to our needs, but other times in response to various other needs from other groups, the economy for one, it needs to remind us of our agency here in an educational institution to make sure that we are involved in the evolution of these tools to help us accomplish those goals that we have. My problem very quickly with, it's not a problem, but my concern with the idea of showing a lot of models of things like digital humanities or technology is really that it's easy for someone who has existed somewhat outside of the use of a lot of these tools to see a model and have it strike a chord of interest right away. and then decide to replicate that model in their own classroom, but without paying a lot of attention to all the other variables that exist there, such as the kinds of students we have, the individual humans in our classrooms, and who they are, and their comfort levels with different technologies, the programs that we design around various subjects and various disciplines, and the relationship those things have or can have to models of instruction that use these technologies. The fear really boils down to the tendency and the problem sometimes of accidentally becoming bound to a model. And let's replace the word model with technology for a moment. The danger of accidentally limiting our ability to have a creative engagement with our methods of instruction and our interest in our field and our research because of restrictions that exist within the technology that we've adopted. So a quick example of this is I had a great conversation with the Chinese department here last night. And they were asking me questions about adding features to courseworks because they really want their students to be able to do some things that courseworks right now doesn't allow for. And the answer is that, well, we don't exist in an institution that is full of startups that can quickly create a new feature for you. They have to serve a community of many tens of thousands of people. So where does that leave the instructor who is interested in doing something innovative, who does believe there is a potential value in a kind of exercise, but that right now that technology doesn't allow for? Well, it leaves them, running up against a wall when they ask for those features because they simply can't be provided. And so what happens in the classroom is that then the whole pedagogy can sometimes become constrained to fit into that piece of technology. And the thing is, the interesting thing, kind of the source of a lot of hope, is that what's happening in the world of information technology now is that there are so many different tools and applications available that are sort of there waiting to be exploited for our educational goals, to the extent that we have the confidence and that we have the literacies and we have the capabilities to take them and mold them and use them in the ways that serve our goals as educators. So again, there's this big kind of pressure, or maybe in some cases a tension around the technology and how it can constrain what we're able to do, and the technology and how it can open up and sort of emancipate our creative control over classroom experiences, and in some cases the research that we undertake as individuals as well. So that's kind of a theme that I'd like you to keep in mind when we have these conversations, and hopefully this is the beginning of what will be an ongoing conversation about the potentials of these technologies in all of our lives, in and out of the academy for accomplishing specific goals. Okay, a minute on digital humanities as a kind of nomenclature. At the risk of rustling feathers, I've never been a big fan of the term digital humanities. It's kind of it's buzzy, obviously. We have a Center for Digital Humanities. Lots of universities are building centers for digital humanities and so on. If you talk to any digital humanitarians, you'll get different definitions of what it means, but the most common one is that it can mean anything and everything, depending on who you ask. So there's this adjective that is very powerful, digital. It's what's happening in the world these days. And then this softer, almost more vulnerable noun, the humanities. And the idea really is about how those two things now are overlapping in what ways to advance our pursuit of both posing and answering questions about the humanities generally. So I'd like to keep the conversation not specific to the definitions of digital humanities, but more about our paying attention to that intersection between the communication capabilities we have through some of these technologies and our pedagogical goals and our research goals. That's digital humanities, at least from where I'm standing from. And I think that's a fairly safe way of looking at this theme. And one last theme to keep in mind before we go through what will be a quick kind of look at a variety of different perspectives on what's happening with technology and education, and also some specific tools for ELAC specifically, is to try to keep in mind, if you can, the idea of environment, and more specifically, environments of study. Part of what we know as educators is that environment really is and can be the most critical variable in terms of the value and utility of someone's educational experiences. We're used to thinking about the environment of study being something constrained somewhat by our notions of formal schooling, classrooms, libraries, and so on. But there are many of us, and especially as part of our research, who have already started to recognize that our notions of environment are no longer in the same form that they may used to have been in. With these digital environments, for example, the way we think about an environment of study needs to begin to shift. Some of us have also reconsidered the value of the larger context in which smaller environments of study exist. For example, the classroom within an environment of the academy, which has an institutional structure, but the academy within the environment of a town or a city, and in that place is an environment of study as well, within a civilization, and so on. That keeping the idea of environment of study in your mind as we look at technology goes a long way for helping orient ourselves to what's happening in that broader landscape. It's hard sometimes to break out of the way we view education as being a classroom-based exercise, but we all know that a lot of learning, and in some instances the most valuable learning, is far outside of classrooms, maybe inspired by what happens in classrooms, but ultimately constructed out in this broader world in which we are all participants, in a broader conversation in which we decide whether or not we want to participate in different ways. Okay, so this idea of environment is critical. Environments of study, web environments of study, classroom and city, and so on. Think of, for example, city as educator, city as teacher. That's an environment of study. For language instruction especially, maybe, in some ways. You think about Chinese courses, and you think about there being a whole community here in New York City, Chinatown, or multiple Chinatowns, which are bustling with potential educational value for someone studying Chinese language. That is also an environment of study, and it doesn't have to be separate from our classroom designs or our technology designs. And in some ways, what the technology has really allowed for is hooking out to those various environments and creating environments of study that are unique to the individual student and their own interests, their own goals, and their own aspirations, in ways that previously were much rarer to be able to occur because of the constraining nature of some of our other environments of study, classrooms specifically, we might say. So you should also be thinking about these technologies as connectors of experience, and what does that really amount to? And we'll look at some good examples of that as we go through some of the tools. I want to take a second here and ask if you have any thoughts or questions about anything that we've kind of covered so far. Or if you have any questions about what we will be covering as the clock ticks down. It's also one of those areas that's difficult to kind of introduce in an hour and a half. So I'm going to try very hard to not go down my various rabbit holes, although it is a very interesting area of conversation. Okay, so where are we at here? I wanted to show you a couple things. Around digital humanities specifically, there are people who they bring a high degree of skepticism to what's happening. And this is important to talk about. I just wanted to maybe bring some sensationalized descriptions of some of the fears. Technology is taking over English departments. The subtitle is excellent for selling stuff. The false promise of digital humanities. It's actually a great article, and I agree with a whole lot of it. But you'll also see that there is a huge interest in better describing digital humanities and specific to certain regions of study. This is a journal that's just on digital humanities connected to Asian studies. It's fairly new. I've looked at, has anyone seen this one before, Asiascape? Digital Asia. They've started to put out articles that are quite something. They mostly describe the use of technologies for very particular forms of research, like data mining text. Data mining ancient text is pretty interesting. Identifying patterns, regionally specific patterns of various texts that have been published throughout Asia, and seeing where along the periphery they start to change into different forms. Now, throughout time, a lot of scholars have studied those specific data points, this text and that text, this one and this one. But because of some of these tools that we have at our disposal now, more or less, we can begin to let some of the technology help us see those patterns by working with massive quantities of text at a time. Tens of thousands of books published in only one region of Asia, for example, and letting various analytic algorithms show us what might be significant about the way things are happening just in that place and how it might be influencing the kinds of text happening in other places. That's one example of the sort of thing that's being published in this new form of academic journal, focusing on digital humanities just in Asia. Okay. This is another sort of sensationalist one that I like to show a little bit. Literature is not data against the digital humanities. So everything I just said described literature as a potential data set for analysis. And then you have another perspective on it, which is to the extent that we begin to look at literature, like sort of the core of humanistic study, the records of humanness throughout time, the story we tell ourselves over and over through the millennia, is not data, because data is a numeric form of description, and literature is an empathic form of description. If you break those patterns down into broad-scale changes, you begin to, in a sense, dehumanize the literature by looking at it as just data. One quick story that sometimes is told having to do with this is the story of someone going into air traffic control school. And they go in, and after their first lesson, they're shown all the blips on the screen. And each blip represents an airplane. And there's a story, it's actually an Irish story about this, and they're in the bar, and he's saying, I don't know if I can go through with this. Each blip is 300 human lives. And I'm being taught to help protect them all from each other, but knowing that each one of those little dots represents hundreds of lives is too much. I can't handle it. How could I possibly keep all of those dots safe from each other? And then, of course, 2 months later, the same two guys are in the bar, and the other guy asks, so what did you end up doing? You dropped out of school. How did things play out for you? He says, oh, no, I stayed in school. And the other guy says, but what about the dots and the 300 lives and the blips and the stress? And he responds, oh, they're just dots. They're just dots on the screen. And that's what you learn in air traffic control school. That's how you sort of absolve yourself from the stress of knowing that. Well, it's a little bit pertinent when we think about big data and humanistic study. It's the dehumanization of text, fear. Okay, so there is that sort of skepticism, and it makes sense. And it's a healthy skepticism to have. It's important that we all use our critical faculties to be thinking about these tools and what they might imply for the kinds of progress we can make as we study ourselves in our cultures. Okay, but along with those, we also have, so along with the skepticism and along with some of the new technologies, very importantly, we also have whole new groups being set up specifically to look at digital humanities and Asian studies. And this is kind of exciting because it shows you that there's a lot of interest and enthusiasm and effort into taking that stuff seriously. Part of it, I can tell you, is because it's happening in other disciplines. And it's happening in the humanities kind of generally in different ways, sometimes related to social science, bringing social science into other humanistic studies, and so on. Along the way, my sense in speaking with a number of these people, including the person who directs this center, who was a Columbia graduate, by the way. Does anyone here know who that is?
We all do. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
He'd be a great person to bring in to actually talk with us a little bit about what they're up to. But the sense was really that Asian studies specifically was starting to not grow isolated from other movements in the humanities, but in some cases a little bit beholden to methodologies that didn't take advantage of a lot of these technologies. Okay, so part of the purpose of these groups beginning to appear in various higher ed institutions is taking that more seriously, which is something is happening, something is changing in how we go about humanistic study, and what are the ways in which those new techniques and methods and tools can help us in our focus on Asian studies specifically, both language and scholarship around culture and everything that it's connected to. Okay, so there is, I want you all to be aware, if you're not, maybe you all are, and that was a waste, but there is movement in that area taking place on kind of a increasingly broad scale. And Weatherhead and ELAC here, what we want to do is at the very least, make sure that we're participating in these conversations because it's valuable and interesting stuff. And at the most, and kind of my, it's not a pitch, but my, what I would like to be somewhat persuasive about is that we have an opportunity here to begin making different kinds of contributions to this kind of conversation. Where is the cutting edge in Asian studies? What is it accomplishing and what is it not accomplishing? But how might we be involved in guiding it in a way that we believe is of value for our research and our teaching? And that's sort of the main focus of this, what will be an ongoing conversation about ways we can go about doing some of those things. Okay, any questions about this stuff? No? Okay. See a lot of nodding heads, so I'm not sure if that means you're all very aware of all this and this long introduction wasn't necessary or that it's interesting. I hope it's more that it's interesting. Okay, good. Right, so I think at this point it might make sense, we're about a half hour, so what I would like to do is show some examples of some of these tools. Being careful not to tell you to do it that way, but to introduce to you some possible entry points. And before actually, once again, I spend way too much time premising these things, but it's because I have so many experiences of showing a tool to find out that what was taken from the demonstration of it was really that you should use that tool. And that's really not what's happening here. The goal is things like this are happening. And the people making it happen are no different from you guys. It's simply true. Okay, you might say, oh, but Tucker, you have this history in education technology and stuff. That's not really what's happening. What's happening is that this whole field, the ELAC specifically, the researchers and faculty and your students are studying the use of these things. It's a form of what I hate to call professional development, which is the way we teach now. We have kind of a responsibility to continually grow ourselves and our own abilities and our own capabilities to accomplish things that occur to us as we develop, as educators and as researchers. And in some instances, the use of these tools can really carry us a long way forward into accomplishing those things. So it's really kind of an insistence that this is about possibility. This isn't about please try these things out. This is about your creative possibilities to redefine certain practices that you have in your libraries and in your classrooms to engage with your field and with your students in some new and innovative ways, and that you each have agency over making that happen. There will not be an institutional push here saying you must use this or you must use that. We all sort of know that because we don't use courseworks in the same way. But what sometimes we can forget, and actually what Dickyi reminded me of in our great conversation earlier this week, that sometimes in the academy we have to be reminded about those kinds of things. It's nice to sort of be reminded about what we're all attempting to accomplish here with our students. And one of those things is that idea of continual growth. And that doesn't pertain just to the continual intellectual and emotional social growth of your students, but also yourselves. The more years pass and the more that these technologies are going to emerge and grow and change, how can we grow continually with them to accomplish ever more interesting and useful things? That's kind of a big question. So I think what we can do now is take a look at some of these. I would like to maybe begin with some, actually, you know what, just to bring some more.
I'd really like to see specific case examples. It would be great if we started looking into specific cases.
Yeah, sure. Actually, yeah, I was feeling the same way. I can ramble about the sort of the philosophical questions of all this. I'm going to try to avoid that. Maybe we can actually go straight to the Treasury of Lives, just because there's a lot there, and I think it might take a little while to show it. So I'll just bring that up.
Hi. So I will talk a little bit about the Treasury of Lives, and let's wait a moment for Tucker to pull that up. Okay, so here we go. Can everyone hear me fine? Okay, maybe I don't even need this. I do need it. Okay, thanks. So the Treasury of Lives is basically a biographical encyclopedia of Tibet, Inner Asia, and the Himalayan region. And so what that means is it's basically biographies of significant figures from the region. And as of right now, we have about 1,060-something biographical essays, so 1,060-something people that we have featured on the Treasury of Lives. And I'll give you a little bit of information about, you know, the people involved, and then we can go a bit into the history of it, how the site began, and so on. Maybe, Tucker, could you go into About for a second? So this biographical encyclopedia has, you can see, we have 1,061 biographies presently on the site. We have 81 scholars and researchers and practitioners who have contributed. So these are basically people in the field who have written biographies for us. And the people on staff are, if you go down a little bit, so it would be, there's 3 of us, Alex Gardner, me, Tenzin, Dickyi, and Catherine Suji. And so we're the ones who are based at the Rubin Foundation working on this. And the Treasury of Lives, by the way, is one of the main projects of the Shelley and Donald Rubin Foundation. So the 3 of us do the day-to-day work of it. We do editing, research, writing, a lot of data management. And then we have a lot of help, as you can see. We have the editorial board and advisory board. So editorial board members will help us peer review, they'll help us read, we ask questions, they give us answers, guidance. Advisory board members don't peer review the articles, but otherwise they do all the same things that you know, we constantly go to. So both sets of board members for guidance. And both Lauren and Lauren's on the advisory board, and Gray is on the editorial board. So they're both here, and so we're constantly asking them questions. And if you, so those then below would be, you know, the list of 81 scholars and researchers who have written for us. so we try to keep track of who's studying what, who is researching what area, what figures, what regions, and then we'll try to solicit biographies. And depending on the figure, sometimes it can take a really long time. Ryusuke Kobayashi was recently doing a biography for us of Agwan Dorjiev, a fascinating figure who was involved in diplomacy. So basically, he was the 13th Dalai Lama sent him to Russia, to the Russian Empire, to try to get Russia's help in protecting Tibet. So this guy was a Buryat who came to Tibet and became the Dalai Lama's debating partner and a confidant of the Dalai Lama. So he sent him and basically made him his diplomat. So Ryusuke recently wrote a really long, detailed, interesting biography for us. So things like that. We're trying to figure out who might be interested in writing for us, and we want as many people as possible. If anyone of you are working on someone that you think we might not have and you might be interested in writing, please let me know. So that's briefly about the people involved in the site. And we also have, of course, two very important people, our web developers who work very closely with us. And so the site itself began in 2006. When it began, it was called the Tibetan Lineages Project. Tucker, maybe you could go back to the main page. And then if you go down to the red arrows, yep, the red arrows right there, yes, 1, 2. Okay, so if you click on her, I'll show you briefly what the biography itself looks like, and then, so it started, the Treasury of Lives started as a Tibetan Lineages project, and it was called the Tibetan Lineages Project. It wasn't called the Treasury of Lives then. And so basically what the site was doing then was essentially featuring hagiographies, really, the lives of saints, so people who were affiliated with different religious sects from Tibet, from the area. And so that was how, and a lot of these saints, their lives are written about in hagiography, so they're always doing miraculous things like squeezing water from rocks and living 300 years and that sort of thing. So that's how the site first started. And then after Alex came on board, he decided really what the world needs is, there are so many places where you can get these hagiographical descriptions and histories. So maybe what people would really like to see is biographies based on historical sources. So if we look at this is one of the most important female incarnation lines of Tibet. The first Samding Dorje Pakmo Churgi Dorma. So the way the biography is displayed is we try to make it as easy for the person to look and to immediately grab discrete information right away. So you can see on the side we have this, what we call the scorecard. And you'll see what incarnation she is, which is Dorje Pakmo. You see what tradition she is, which is Nyingma. You see the geography that she lived in, was associated with, her time period, 15th century, and then the different institutions that she was associated with. And a lot of these institutions, because a lot of these people that we have on the site are religious in nature. A lot of the history of Tibet and that region is religious in nature. So a lot of these people are religious figures, which means a lot of these institutions on the side are religious institutions. So if you scroll down, please, Tucker. All the way down. It's a long one, written by Hildegard Jimberger. you'll see we also have something Dorje Pagmo's teachers, and you can get, the subsequent incarnations. And if you go down further along, you'll see the bibliography. So you can see what sources were consulted. Not only that, we try to make the bibliography as extensive as possible, so you can also find out what other sources have written about this person. So that's how the site evolved. And in the last 2 years, we also have made like several major evolutions of the site. So you can see up there we have plays, we have traditions, we have families and vocations. So it used to be just what we used to have on the site, basically as a classification category, was just traditions. So if you click on traditions, please. So you had this, and that was the way that people were classified, and you could find them based on their different religious traditions. The number on the side is basically, right, the amount of people belonging to that religious tradition that we have on the site. So if you go back up now, please, and go into families and vocations. So that's a new category that we evolved in the last 2 years, because we decided, well, we're doing all of these people that are not just religious people, and so the problem was how to categorize them. And so we came up with these sort of different categories, and this has also been evolving, because we recently started doing government officers, we recently started doing doctors, and this is still a constantly evolving category depending on what new bios that come in. And as we do this, a lot of questions come up, and often people are in multiple categories. So if you click on Lhasa aristocracy, actually, and you go down a little, so this, it just a brief description of what that means. And you'll see a timeline, then you see sort of the families that we have featured and the biographies that we have. And you'll see, right, for instance, Yuthoktashi Tundu. So he is Lhasa aristocracy. He is also a government officer. So people do belong to multiple categories. And so the way categorization actually was really, it was difficult for us as we were thinking through this about the best way to put people in the easiest boxes that people can access them. So at this point, actually, we recently decided, so we have weekly meetings with the web developers, because some of this is also related to the technology behind it, and then also Alex, Katie, and I will talk and discuss and decide like what the site should look like now, what's maybe new changes that we need to make, that sort of thing. And recently we decided, actually, and our web developer is working on it right now, but it hasn't been done yet, is so we're going to change families and vocations into just people. So it will say people. If you click on that again, please. And then you'll have, right, artists, you'll have plans, you'll also have incarnations. We have many different kinds of incarnations that we write about, treasury revealers, translators. So it seemed like if you go into people, that was sort of a blanket category that then people can go into and explore more. It seemed, it was just a wider, easier category for us. So what we will have, what the new iteration of TOL will look like is, instead of place, it will be people, traditions, place, and time. So what time will look like is basically it will look the way that families and vocations right now is displayed, but we have figures from the 7th to the 20th century. So we will have, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, different centuries, and a brief description of each century, the major events that occurred during that century, that sort of thing. And then you will be able to see all the people that were born and lived and worked in that century. So hopefully people will find that new facet easy to use and useful.
Can you show us place?
Oh yeah, definitely. You're excited about that. Just briefly, before I do that, if we go back into families and vocations, I just want to show you like one thing that, and if you go into clans, so we're actually very happy with this page because there's hardly any information about clans in English. So we hope that this will be a really useful resource for scholars and interested persons. And the tricky thing is with clans, which were extremely, extremely important in Tibet before the modern age. There's so much there's a lot of conflicting information in Tibetan clan history books. So, one will say one thing, one will say another. So we try to have descriptions, brief descriptions. I mean, this is not our expertise, it's not clans. We try to have brief descriptions, and then we'll try to say, this history says this, that history says that. If you just click on Ardo, the first one, so that's the Ardo clan. So there's a very brief description, and the person that we have right now that belong to that clan. And if you go back and click on the next one, Akyong, so you'll see, right, Akyong description, and you can see we actually have a person belonging to that clan, but his biography does not show up below, so we didn't properly go into his biography to make that link. So there's a lot of that sort of behind the scenes data management that we have to constantly do and update. So it's an exercise in data management and tracking, as well as the research and writing. And I think now maybe we can, let's go to place. So that's one of our main big features. We worked a lot on it, and maybe maximize it a little bit to the left. Yeah. Okay. So this is our map of the Tibetan Plateau. The map itself was hand sketched for us by geographer Carl Reavek of UC Merced. And basically, what we have tried to do is create place records. So if you zoom in a little bit more, all of a sudden, I wonder why the records are not popping up.
Yeah, they were all in there at the list out.
Yeah, that's odd. So
maybe zoom in, click on one of the links below, Amdo or Com or something.
Oh, that will definitely. So the links below are just static maps that if you want to print out, or you can have that map.
Click the bottom links. So just use that.
Oh, there we go.
I just changed browsers.
Oh.
So this is from
Okay, great. So we have tried, and we are trying to create as many place records as we can, and this is we see this as a supplement, a very important supplement to our biographies. So basically, the biography will have this person went to so and so, he established this monastery, or he went to this region. So you can click on these links. You can click on the institutions that he has established, and a little that will pop up, and you can go to Dolmal Hakam's page. If you go to view Dolmal Hakam page just below, yeah, there we go. So each institution has its own separate page, which looks like this, with a brief description and a timeline of the people. And if you go down even more, the biographies of people that are associated with that place. So let's see. Right now we have about 800 place records, and what we have tried to do is, so all of our people and our places, we try to work with TBRC, the Tibetan Buddhist Resource Center. I don't know how many of you are familiar, but anyway, we try to work with them and sort of mesh our records with theirs. So researchers will be able to go to both sites and get information from both places. Maybe, Gray, could we go to, if you go to the map, and then maybe go to Lhasa, because that might be...
Good density.
Yeah, good density.
So each one of these numbers is the clusters of...
Yes,
biographies.
clusters of monasteries.
Okay.
Monasteries. And basically, so this is Carl Riavek's hand-drawn map on top of Mapbox, which is like Google Maps but different, which we chose because they gave us much more flexibility in terms of choosing how this was displayed. And one thing we've tried to do was create, go into Lhasa and sort of create place records for a lot of the, because Lhasa, had all the old manor houses that the aristocrats lived in. It had all these important temples and monasteries. So all of these red dots would be places, and maybe we'll stop with Diplom Monastery, which would be to the left, right? More towards the left.
So the green
There we
circles
go.
are clusters.
Yes, they're clusters.
And what happens when you click on it? Or
They expand, and then you see actual dots. You see actual dots. So Diplom, if you click on the mother monastery, yep, there we go. And go to the View Diplom Monastery page. So you have the description, and Diplom is, an enormous institution with a significant history. So it will have, you have that timeline of people. You can click on the timeline, go to those people that were affiliated with Diplom. Or if you go down, there's a list of incarnations, and then the actual biographies. So these are all different ways that we're trying to make people enjoy reading and learning about these significant figures more. So, questions now or later? I think
Yeah, let's take some questions. And right before we take the first question, again, I hope that you've been kind of thinking a little bit about environments of study. So here we have an environment with a lot of different kinds of information and a lot of possibility for identifying important relationships between things. Obviously, there's a lot of content in there, but the way in which it was constructed is also educative, on its own. So I just want to, call that out for a second. It's a resource, but the way it was designed was really to help facilitate discovery, to help encourage people to go deeper and further into those data points and to derive some meaning from it. You had a question.
Yeah, I understand its value as a resource. I'm wondering if you have examples of more structured assignments and how something like this could be used in a classroom setting.
We don't at this point right now, unfortunately. We have had academics who have contacted us to say they're using it as a resource in their classrooms. Gray, you've used it.
And mostly so far, the students submit their own work, so they'll generate. So one class, when this was sort of early days, maybe 250, maybe there were 500 biographies at the time, but there were very few women, and the course was held over Barnard, so there were 13 women in the class, and they saw almost no women. There were probably fewer than 13 women on the website at that point. So we maybe double the number or triple the number of women biographies on the class, and then they get to put that on their CV as this kind of peer-reviewed contribution to a website. And Alex Gardner right now is teaching a course on Tibetan life writing, so he may be thinking up assignments as we speak.
I believe he is planning to have everyone write a biography for Treasury of Lives.
But the students get really excited about they think of it they think of the assignment differently if they know it's going to sort of show up on the web, and they write to me and say, has it posted yet? I want to put it on my CV, that kind of thing. So I mean, one of the first assignment I worked with Tucker to do was something called a digital object biography, right? We took a high resolution digital image from a museum here in New York, about 16 megabytes, so you can really zoom in on it. And then Tucker developed a tool called Media Thread that would let the student annotate the image. I think we were inspired by a dental record, an X-ray record tool for annotating where there were cavities. And the students would take that image, go do some research, and then mark it up, sort of analyze it, parse it, write an essay that let you zoom into that image, but also you could zoom back out and so forth. And one of the first students, Elizabeth, ended up getting interviewed by Facebook, because she put that, tool down on her resume, and they flew her out to California to pick her brain about that tool. So there's a kind of excitement with the students. I've had two students in computer science now develop different projects, related to these kind of digital opportunities. Yeah, Kim?
Where are you going to show the object biography?
We could. You want to try to pull that up?
Sure. Yeah. If you have in the meantime, that area to really highlight is the public side of all of this stuff. So one of the interesting things that's happening with digital humanities is, again, that line between the academy as a place of study and the wider world, the public, the open conversation, is now very easy to address. So students being able to do classroom work that they have a different kind of motivation behind when they know it has that public audience. And these tools make that sort of contribution very easy, or easier than it was in the past. Was there a question about? Yeah.
Well, the site you just shown is beautiful. It's a beautiful resource. But I'm wondering if you could click through. Our experience working with Center for New Media and with you is that you show us a number of models of things, and I know you don't like to show models, but if we see the model, we say, oh, if you could do that, then I, the person with the content, could do this, and it's heuristic. It goes up. So unless we see a range of different ways people have gone at material, I think imagination.
It's a little bit of a step. That's true. I think so. I'm no longer at CCNMTL, but I think that they're still working on model creation to walk people through specific exercise types. And I do appreciate the value of that, like being able to see something that was tried and what the outcomes were in order to iterate on it on your own. I hope I didn't scare people away too much with the I'm against all models thing.
No, but I mean, you showed this is one example of
right.
how people have created a site.
Yes, right.
There are other examples, and it was just to see different ways people have used technology, no matter what they're trying to present. I think it's helpful.
Yes, absolutely. Are there other questions about this stuff? Spice?
Yeah, question for Dickyi. Could you bring us into the behind the scenes of how you got the website going, how you generate content and how you organize content, and how much do you rely on people to contribute, and how much do you use mechanical algorithms or anything that is not human originated?
I would say it is very humanistic. As far as algorithms and stats are concerned, I mean, we use Google Analytics, we look at it, but generally, we generally know sort of what are going to be the popular biographies or biographies that people are interested in seeing, that sort of thing. A lot of the site content, so basically all 1,060-something biographies, they've been written by those 81 authors. Some of whom have written way more than others. I mean, Alex, the editor-in-chief, has written, a ton. And we have 2 researchers in Tibet and one in New York, who all 3 of whom have generated like probably a couple hundred by themselves. And so part of the thing is actually right now we have a backlog of over 1,500 biographies that are waiting to be edited, because the editing process takes a significant amount of time, and then once the material itself is ready to go up, there's a lot of tech-related work. We need to create all the links, we need to, that sort of thing. So there's some of that stuff. So hopefully, I mean, in the next, the plan is, in the next year, maybe a year and a half, we will be able to go through our backlog and then significantly expand the site's offerings.
And if you're asking that question specifically about whether or not you'd be able to do something like this or to participate in something like this for your own purposes here at the Academy, the answer is yes. So part of what this whole session today is for is to inspire you to come and talk with me and to share your ideas about things you'd like to accomplish. And then what we will do is decide how to go forward and try to make that into a reality. So the purpose today is not to say, here are a bunch of things, again, go out and use them, but rather come and, if these things are interesting for you, if you have ideas, something that you'd like to try, that's the conversation we want to have here. That's the conversation that we want to work with you on bringing to life in different ways.
And actually, as far as the Treasury is concerned, we have created, a bunch of new tools that we are happy to share. I think actually maybe I should I just quickly show you guys the painting tool?
I think actually we would like to see some of the pedagogical tools.
Oh,
some
sure,
of us have
of
to leave,
course.
so we a very practical concern for instructors are kind of I mean, this is a brilliant website, but now we have an access and a taste of it.
Engaging digital Tibet, you might be able to at least get the images up too.
Well, yeah. Okay, so here's engaging digital Tibet. This was, and this is part of the problem. It's a great tool for the students, and once they're logged in, it's great. But it's very hard to share, including with our funders, who've been largely the Shelley and Donald Rubin Foundation. But so here's Explore Collection. This is how the students get into to look at and select an object. So we have these images, we have these thumbnail sketches, so the students can say, oh, I'm interested in that, and then they claim them over here, and start doing their research. Now then, once they've selected an object, it's pulled over into this other environment, the media thread environment, and we've broken it down into several steps. The treasure hunt sort of introduces them to the idea of sort of collecting data. So, getting into that engaging digital Tibet set of materials and looking for specific things. So, looks like it's not loading up right, but basically their job is to go find a religious object, go find an object from daily life, a bowl or armor or something like that. And so just so they get used to and they kind of tinker with it. Then the final object biography assignment, we sort of, the outline is here. One of the things an art historian at Harvard would send their students to the actual museum and say, sit in front of your object for an hour and just think about it and notice. And so, we have these virtual objects, and they probably don't spend an hour looking at them. But even if they slow down enough to look at one image for 20 minutes and start exploring it, they have a different experience of it. And so here we have the 75 class responses. I'll just pick one at random, and we'll see if it works. the tool allows them to bring in a lot of outside material. So here, this person's chosen a wood block, and you can see they've highlighted the whole thing, but the amazing thing about the tool, when you get a high resolution image, is that you can really go close, and you can move around and look at these objects, and sometimes the students will work with their Tibetan language instructors and parse all the text and so forth. But they can pull stuff from all sorts of contexts. So this is the art store, which the university pays a lot of money for, and it has art from all around the world, European art and so forth. So this person has gone and found a Jain object that is interesting to compare with. And again, like our images, the art store images are incredibly high resolution, so you can just go closer and closer. They can import clips, video clips. This looks like it should be, no, that's not a video. So what, and you know, I mean, here someone has gone to, you know, Japan, India, a Qing base. We'll see where this reliquary is from, Tibetan reliquary. But really, you know, they can do really interesting comparative work, and they can also pull in images. I know the Ravis use the same media thread tool to annotate film clips. So it's very easy with this tool to grab a clip from a film and then use this writing space on the left-hand side to annotate it. So one of my students last semester did this. You know, I have a lot of trouble. We have all these great film resources, but you've got to get them from off campus. You've got to go to the classroom. You've got to queue it up when you didn't have much early access to the classroom, and maybe the CD player doesn't work that day, and you can't fast forward. So she's just importing film clips and annotating them on a website, and then, you know, I'll be able to pull them up wherever I am, wherever my classroom is. As long as the internet's working, I'll be able to just pull those up and use them right away. And Robbie has students do, you know, write essays using film clips, using this media thread tool. I think Charles Armstrong used it
he
for
used it
refugees
for a while. That's right.
work or something.
And it's one thing I wanted to mention on the pedagogical question. So the idea behind the design of this, when we were building this, was tied to a specific pedagogical task, which was the idea of quoting authentic primary sources. In the same way that throughout time we've become acculturated to quoting text. Whenever we're writing an essay, we quote that author and so on. The idea is that now that we live in this new communication environment that's very multimedia, why is it that we can't quote those media objects in the same way that we quote text? And part of the explanation for that was just because of habit. We've only quoted text, really, historically. Otherwise, we embed a whole image. But that was an unnecessary habit to really be in, and easy to break out of once you use the tools and design tools for that purpose. So the idea here is really that you're quoting pieces of objects or quoting pieces of video in your essay writing, in your description, as a way of showing specific evidence and as a way of doing comparative analysis and stuff like that.
So this is a YouTube clip, you know, and it's just, I mean, it's wonderful for bringing these things to life.
All right, so again, this is inside of that one environment of study, and this is a service that the university provides to all faculty. So any of you teaching any courses here can have a media thread site set up that allows you to work with images and video and so on, and also to create libraries and different sort of assignment types and things like that. And there's a whole staff of people who can walk you through actually designing the assignment and helping you come up with new ideas for how to use the tool in purposeful ways. Yes?
So I can see how it works as a kind of animated encyclopedia, which is sort of what yours is. And I can see how it works for someone who wants students to interact with images or objects. What about those of us who aren't doing that sort of thing? Is there anything there if you're actually working with events, people, texts, and so on? Or does this kind of drive us to doing this kind of course because it's so cool to have images and
That's the question, and that's the great concern, is to always be aware of when the technology is starting to influence and encourage ways of teaching that become less within our ability to control. Part of what we need to do in terms of cultivating our own literacies around these tools is to make sure that that doesn't happen. That because MediaThread is there, that we don't end up teaching to MediaThread. That instead we claim those tools to help us accomplish the goals that we've decided we have for our educational endeavors. So, so the answer is yes, there is absolutely a risk of that. And it's our responsibility to make sure that we don't fall into the patterns and habits of use of these tools, and that we stay innovative and we stay creative with them.
But likewise, I mean, you know, if the kind of stuff, like for example, Robin has a bunch of stuff on the Asia for Educators website that I find very useful, particularly the Chin scrolls. But there aren't a lot of things that are visual that can speak to the issues that I'm interested in. I'm working in legal and economic history, and I'm not having the students data crunch
Right.
or do you know quantitative analysis or anything like that. So should I just say to myself, okay, I'll have them look at a few scrolls, but that's sort of it for me. Maybe there's a few paintings that'll give them a sense of the environment, or am I just missing something and people are doing something that I'm missing and perhaps can enrich my class?
There are probably things that can enrich your class, and they're not necessarily things that have been done before. They're things that if we, in conversation, can surface what some of those methods might be, we can invent them together and make them happen in that way. And that's sort of where we're at in this conversation, is emancipating ourselves, both from traditional methodologies that we now can see have room for improvement, and from some of the accidental constraints of the tools that we've invented. If you think about the deterministic argument of technology, it's simply that the more things we create, the more we're created by those things. And one of our big responsibilities maybe as educators, especially in the humanities, is to be constantly aware of when we're being influenced in various ways by the tools at our disposal. One of the things that I've just incidentally always been very uneasy about is the use of things like CourseWorks and those large form course management tools across big universities, because in my own experience, as I've watched those tools evolve over time, I've seen courses begin to take the shape of the learning management system itself. And that might be very fruitful, and it might standardize, and it might be best practice-y. But best practice for who? And best practice for what purposes? If we're not constantly revisiting those bigger questions, then we do run into the danger of accidentally being guided by a technology that doesn't know us and doesn't know what we're really trying to do. We know those things. So that's kind of the tack that I think we'd like to take here at Weatherhead and ELAC when it comes to these tools.
So you're basically, I'm just checking, can I ask you a bit?
Yeah.
So so people can make an appointment with you and sit down and talk about their classes.
Exactly. And part of it are pedagogical conversations.
Right.
But then there are some other bigger interests that Weatherhead and ELAC have that are a little broader. So with the Treasury of Lives site, for example, can we imagine building together something like that? That's, Korean and Japanese and Tibetan and Chinese in a shared environment where we can see those relationships between assets, student work, and so on. We're trying to imagine those possibilities, basically. The one-on-one thing is totally fine, but we might find great progress to be made in working collaboratively towards bigger picture endeavors and enterprises. Yes, Laura.
Sometimes when I just think about the development of courses or research tools in the library sense, it's sort of, we look at models, or we've just sort of been doing things the same way all the time. Are there questions, are there ways to get at this, to sort of think outside the box? Do you have questions we can ask ourselves in this, you know what I'm saying, along what Matt was just asking now, but what are questions that somebody could ask themselves to get the process even going?
Yeah, I mean, some of the best questions to ask ourselves is, outside of our fields of interest, how are we interacting with the world around us in ways that influence an idea or a feeling or a lifestyle, try to remember that we're embedded. These educational environments are embedded in a life that we actually live. And a lot of these tools are the ways in which we can integrate those aspects of what it means to be a growing, learning person. So the question would be, the way that I communicate with my peers, the way that I go out and have inspired moments when I go to a conference or when I have a great conversation with so-and-so, what are the ways in which those things might inform a way of educational process in my courses or in my my day-to-day life as a librarian, and how can these tools help bring those things to a level of value that's clear, that we feel good about, and that we can iterate on and be experimental with, but not in a dangerous way. The question ultimately is always comes back to what are our goals, and obviously those are big and hard to answer sometimes. But I think with a concerted effort to think about what really our goals are at the level of the classroom, some of those identifications are more easily made. So if my goal is to have my students extremely interested in the subject, let's say it's a Civ 101 type class here. It's an intro to Japanese Civ or something like that. Maybe we can say one of our goals is to try to get more students interested in that field, maybe to go on and become, to take it on as a major. If we think that way, then we know that we can't have this course separated from all of their other East Asian courses. So what are the ways in which we can link our course to the bigger picture that's connected to their personal interests, and things like that. So I guess the short and longer, that was a long way of saying, I don't think there's a set of questions, but there's more like big questions, which might contain myriad questions within them. Yes?
Can we see some other examples that you prepare just to see what other possibilities are there?
Yeah, so another big topic in, well, let me see, are there any other questions about anything that we just kind of covered? Okay, so another big area in digital humanities is using these text analysis tools, like I mentioned earlier. So what are these things and how might that apply to our studies here? If you go to, where are you from?
I had to shut it down. I got jammed up on my,
Okay, we have a frozen computer. Maybe too many times. Yeah, if you keep working on it, I can talk about it, and then we'll show it at the end. Actually, I can just.
I do the text, China.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, if you could. This is actually fine to keep up because I have my links in an email to myself here. If you can choose, for example.
It's not responsive.
No. Okay. Okay, so text analysis stuff. This is a big, interesting area. The idea is that huge collections of text that are regionally specific, like a particular era and region in China, for example. To the extent that those texts can be digitized, they can now be run through programs which are freely available, which I can show you as soon as this gets unfrozen, that helps you identify particular pieces of it, tag them and code them in various ways, that sort of reveals patterns and relationships that are hard to see if you're just reading through those texts. So it adds a layer of analytic tool on top of traditional texts. It is a very exciting area for a lot of digital humanists right now. And the tool I was going to show you is one that's freely available. If you show this one, but it actually has to be opened in Chrome. So if you can copy that.
Maybe.
Yeah. Maybe double click on it. Okay, no problem. All right, one moment. this is one such tool. It's called Marcus. And here's the basic description of it. Has anyone seen this before? So this is a product of Chicago's text lab. What you do is you can upload files in classical Chinese and then tag various things that are of interest to you, but then also run those tags against others that have been added to that text. Let's go through and actually do one of these. So if I find a piece of text, maybe I'll just go here. I don't know if you guys have made use of this before. This is something that I find useful. Yeah. Have you guys ever been to this site here? Anyone seen this before? Yes? Okay, yeah. Very useful. Sometimes can get a little unwieldy because of the way they went about architecting this. Took advantage of technologies that were available at a certain time. And hopefully we can look for some evolution in the future. But you can do a lot of sorting, finding, and organize in a very interesting way. But what you end up with at the end of a lot of these are actual texts which exist in digital form. And you can see they're bilingual. Some of them have full translations like this. So depending on what you're teaching, you might actually find just in this site something of value. But the reason why I'm here is actually to try to grab, if I can find a non-translated one, is to grab some text. So I'm just going to grab this text here.
And just so you all know, Tucker majored in Japanese studies, lived in a Himalayan, went to high school in a Himalayan setting. He's worked with Carol Schultz on Korean soap operas as language teaching tools, and he knows Chinese from living in China for 5 years.
Yeah, 5 years.
So he covers the gamut.
Okay, so all I did was paste that text in, and you can actually upload whole files if you have them, PDFs or whatever. But then you have some options here. You can have this analytic tool actually mark it up for you, which could be interesting for various forms of research, or you can mark it up yourself. If you have it mark it up for you, it gives you certain interesting options, such as if you identify something of interest that's thematic in the text, you can see throughout the entire text where else that theme appears. So this is different than a concordance search where you're doing like a keyword search. It can be searched thematically based on the meaning of those words in that phrase. So you can see throughout an entire text where there might be a hot spot of a certain topic, or how they might relate, how that theme might relate to others in different ways. If I choose, I don't know, maybe I'll just choose a random. Oops, I went to it. Here you can enter in text for instant translation. It should appear here. Not. I don't know if it's able to do whole phrases. Oops, that took me to an outside dictionary. But in any case, this is sort of the way that works. You can highlight various things, and you can tag them in various ways. Ask it to mark that up for you in that way. It will go through and do it. And if, for example, you have in there these categories of ways of marking it up, places, dates, titles, and so on. And it looks like, maybe I need a much bigger example of that. But essentially, what the tool allows you to do, let's say that this was an entire text. It will actually point out to you where throughout that entire collection of text those themes exist. So it's an assistive tool for doing text analysis. It also gives you word counts and percentage breakdowns and things like that. It might be a little bit tough for me to demonstrate it right now because I haven't used it extensively, but I wanted to show you an example of a freely available markup tool that's specific to this target language. Okay, so that's another sort of format. And then just to show you again that other site, environments like this are easy to spend hours within, just finding topics and relationships and things that might begin to emerge as being important. And if you imagine being a student and you've asked them to read one of the Analects or something of that sort, if it's available here and it's marked up in certain ways, they can begin to identify important figures or important topics or ask questions about various keywords and what they really amount to and mean. Okay? So that's just, those are two tools that are specific to Chinese language, but there are many others like that. Other questions? Yes? No? Yes?
I wanted to make a comment that going back to what Maddie was saying, that for introductory courses, that it seemed to me the site Grace developed where you're looking at an object and exploring it, that at least the breakthrough that I saw in Humanities was instead of having students just read history and talk about it, was they were actually given things to look at and then given tasks. Maddie, these scrolls were net scrolls. They're 72 feet long. And we said to her, here are scrolls from the Qing dynasty, some of the most famous scrolls. What could you do with them? And she looked at them and said, oh, they're pictures of markets and towns. I'm teaching economic history. I'd like my students to be able to count the number of wine shops, count the number, and do some analysis of them. So, of course, that gave the people with technology the idea of, okay, we can zoom in, we can make it large, and then actually they color-coded different.
Yes.
You know, again, it was marked up for the students, but then they could go in. So it's this sense of, and what Gray was showing with his images, it's a sense of using another text.
Exactly right.
That we never used before. You said that. And the sonic for the sonic glossary, I thought was one of the most amazing things.
Yeah.
The TCMGL for the music humanities, where the students can just say, oh, I forgot what a fugue is, or I forgot what they told, and they just push it and they can hear it in their own bedrooms. I mean, this is just amazing. So this kind of different ways of, experiencing the content that you
Yeah, that word experience. So what is the nature of those sorts of interactive experiences with content that historically have just been text on a page, are now able to be interacted with and annotated and saved and so on? That's the big interest. I mean, these are where the possibilities exist for furthering our pedagogies.
One of the most exciting projects that came along was that a student who is, he's a GS student, he's in his 40s, he's been a bassist all his life, and when I offered the object biography, he just went online, bought a Tibetan lute, and used YouTube videos to teach himself how to play the lute, and then he, studied the history of the lute and wrote that up for his object biography. But it concludes with him making a YouTube video of himself playing the lute, after giving some examples of traditional Tibetan lute. But it was this amazing engagement, and he's still in touch with me 3-4 years later, constantly sending me news, and it's been a real spark. So it's been exciting.
Well, the most amazing thing I think about objects too is that when you, as you showed, when you digitize them, you can see them much better than you can see with your naked eye. You can be sitting looking at the object, and Mike Hearn at the Met's Asia said you can, with these scrolls, which are sort of his baby, when they're digitized, you can actually get right into the line store and see what it looks like. You can't do that when you're standing in front of it in the face. So
that's right.
It just opens these whole areas.
Yeah, and traditionally we used to call that in the textual world, close reading. Close reading of the text. Well, now it's close reading of objects, which, just as you've said, you can actually get closer to them in some ways than you can in the museum, although there's clearly an argument for the value of the materiality of the thing as well. When you can't handle it and manipulate it because it's too fragile, a digital version of it allows for certain exploratory possibilities. And we have the means to make that stuff available. So if there are those of you who do have those sorts of areas of content in your teaching, that's a conversation we should really have. How could we get those things up into that virtual space where they can be scrutinized and studied and compared in ways that previously were very difficult? We have the means and the tools to make those sorts of things happen, but it depends entirely on the interest that you have, having identified those things to be of value to put up in the environment in that way. So it starts with you. It starts with you. It starts with your interests. It starts with your enthusiasms, and then we can make things happen because of that interest. Other questions about all this stuff? Yes.
You mentioned media thread. Are there other tools that we use for annotating video that you've worked with?
I haven't.
Yeah, there are some.
Yeah.
There are some online, and some of them are free, but and some of them allow you to do things like the John Madden, like you write over the video and stuff like that. But there are not many of those.
Right.
So VoiceThread is one that allows for that kind of work. But if you have a specific interest in that sort of thing, then come and talk, and we can find a tool to do that.
The great thing about a tool that's developed here is that CC&MTL is kind of committed to keeping it alive. And so when my students started to need to import clips and was having trouble, they created the app or the widget or whatever it was to make that happen. Whereas maybe they don't want to do that with a tool that someone else has developed somewhere else or whatever. Or you have to get a site license. And they've been very good about eventually getting site licenses. I was showing the map that kind of looked like weather, the development of Tibetan monasteries as a kind of pressure front or something, and like that. That's something called CartoDB, and the students took an Excel spreadsheet of 1,000 monasteries, and with a click of a button, they made it legible. I've been working with the data for 10 years without being able to visualize it very well, and they just put it in there, and you could suddenly see, where the clusters of monasteries were. And so the university's pretty good about finding those resources, but sometimes it takes a semester to get a site license up and running. And the great thing about Tucker is, having worked here for so long, he knows who the parties are, and he can try to connect you with those.
Yeah, I mean, one big thing is if there is interest in doing something that's a little more sophisticated, there are different groups around campus that have different skill sets and different levels of expertise. So part of what I'm hoping to accomplish here is bridging those groups with you all, so that when you do have something you really want to do, it can actually happen. And it might involve a video team from one group and a big data analytic team from the Big Data Institute, which we have right on the other side of campus, which very few people take advantage of. And one other thing to say, and this question comes up a lot, and it has to do with the idea of building new tools specifically. A lot of faculty these days are interested in apps for fun. They say things like, can I build something for my students to go out and either take pictures or recordings and put them up into an environment of some sort that we design together? And the answer is, building apps like that is actually a little bit difficult. It takes time, and chances are an app that allows for the things that you're interested in exists already. Now there's this world that we've always stayed away from within the academy, which is asking students to actually buy an app specifically for our class. But in the scheme of things, and as long as privacy is not a big concern, depending on the things that you're taking pictures of and so on, but if it's, you can, it's not unreasonable to ask a student to buy a 99-cent app, maybe. This is a conversation we all need to have, but there are some very valuable tools that are not free, but almost free. And if you're going to ask students to spend $100 buying textbooks for a class, at what point does it become okay to say, and part of what you need to secure for yourself as a class is this app? And if they don't have a tablet or a smartphone to do it, they do exist on campus. They can be loaned and things of that sort. So we can make things like that happen too. And one final thing, and maybe this is like the final piece of super encouragement, is think again about the environment in which we exist here and those pockets of skill sets. We have, across the street at Teachers College, whole programs training students to build educational apps and educational resources and websites. They exist. They do doctorates on them. They do master's projects on them. If there's something that you are imagining that does not exist, but you're interested to know and whether or not we could actually build that thing, you might find a very willing group of collaborators that's going to be doing something similar to that anyway, and they're looking for you. They're looking for the person in the classroom because you're who they're building it for ultimately, or for your research. They're looking for you. They don't have the East Asian expertise that you have, but they are interested in contributing this education technology to your field. Together, we can identify those groups and sort of bring them into our own interests and undertakings. Okay, that's a real possibility, and it's a smart one because those resources are here. Why not take advantage of them? It's a little weird sometimes how disconnected the groups are around campus, especially like the textual analysis stuff that we just started talking about, which is a huge conversation. There are groups here that are doing big data text mining, but it's not on Asia-specific things. It's on like the entire Twitter universe. It's on all of the Facebook posts to do sentiment analysis for marketing companies and stuff. But those groups exist, and they might have tools that have a kind of power that can radically transform what we might use it for, like doing a scan of all the WeChats or doing a scan of all the Weibo posts and things like that. I'm really interested in Chinese studies. I don't know the Japanese equivalents to it. Okay, so that's another thing to just be thinking about. And for any of you, we have to wrap up, but for any of you who would like to continue this conversation, there's certainly a lot to talk about. It would be tremendous to build something together and make something really happen, to actually put some new things out there in the world. And that's kind of what this whole fellowship is about, is making sure that that takes place, okay? So my contact information is TH2252. This will be available on the probably event site for this. But feel free to write and schedule an appointment and come in and we can talk about these things. Okay? Final question?